All right, welcome to another deep dive. Buckle up, because today we're going deep into Georges Bataille's psychological structure of fascism. This one is notoriously complex, and, looking at the sources you've given us, I can tell you're not looking for the easy route here.
Yeah, this deep dive is going to be a tough one.
We've got the accursed share, eroticism, death and sensuality, theory of religion. It seems like you want to get a really philosophically robust understanding of Bataille's ideas on fascism.
We're definitely going to have to be careful here, fearless even, when we explore these ideas.
Oh, absolutely.
Bataille never shied away from, let's say, the more difficult topics, and his writing can be, well, dense. But by bringing in these other texts, especially the Visions of Excess collection, I think we can really start to see how all of these ideas, they're all interconnected, how these concepts that may seem separate at first glance actually all come together to form, I think, a really powerful critique, not just of fascism, but of Western society in general.
Okay, so let's just set the stage here.
Right.
Bataille is writing this in the 1930s. This is a time where fascism is very clearly on the rise in Europe, and he's engaging with Marxist thought, but he's also going beyond it. He's saying that Marxism doesn't fully account for the complexities of how societies form.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to the religious and political structures, what he calls the superstructure.
And what's so interesting, I think, is that Bataille sees fascism as not just a political ideology, but as this extreme manifestation of this superstructure, like a crystallization of some tendencies that are already there within Western thought and culture.
Oh, okay. So you're saying that he's not just trying to explain fascism as this historical thing that happened, but he's actually using it as a lens through which to examine much deeper questions about power and desire.
Yes, exactly.
About the very nature of human society, of being together.
Precisely. And to do this, he introduces a number of key concepts that are going to be really important as we kind of go through his argument.
Right. So let's unpack some of these.
Let's do it.
One that comes up immediately, right in the introduction, is this distinction between the homogeneous and the heterogeneous.
Right.
This feels like a pretty foundational concept in Bataille's thought.
Absolutely, yeah. So for Bataille, the homogeneous represents everything that's ordered, rational, predictable in society. It's like the realm of work, production, the everyday. Think of it as a world of, clear boundaries and roles.
So it's like the world of systems. Everything has its place. It has its function.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so the heterogeneous then, on the other hand, is the realm of the sacred, the transgressive, the unpredictable.
Yes.
Everything that kind of disrupts that smooth functioning of the homogeneous, of that system, that which resists being categorized and controlled.
It does. It resists that categorization. And it's not necessarily chaotic. It's excessive. It overflows the boundaries of the homogeneous. And Bataille even says that the heterogeneous is, that which is expendable, that which has no place within that rational order of things.
So how does this relate to fascism? Because it seems like fascism, with its emphasis on order and control, would be completely opposed to the heterogeneous.
Right, yeah, that's where things get really interesting. Bataille's arguing that fascism, while it appears to be upholding this homogeneous order, actually relies on the heterogeneous for its power.
So fascism, while outwardly striving for order, is actually feeding off chaos and transgression.
Exactly. And to understand how this works, I think we need to introduce another key figure, the sovereign.
Okay, the sovereign. Who is this in Bataille's framework?
So for Bataille, the sovereign is the one who embodies the heterogeneous within this homogeneous order. So they stand outside of the normal rules, but they're also a source of power and fascination.
So are we talking about a king or a dictator?
Yeah, it could be.
Someone stands above the law?
It could be those figures, but it's not limited to those figures. He uses the example of the archaic practice of potlatch. You might have heard of this.
Oh, yeah, I've read about that.
Yeah, where rival chiefs would compete by giving away or even destroying vast amounts of wealth.
It's like a ritualized excess.
It is, yeah.
It's asserting power not through accumulation, but through waste.
Precisely. And this, for Bataille, is a key aspect of that sovereign impulse, the desire to kind of go beyond those limitations of the homogeneous world, to engage in acts of pure, unproductive expenditure.
I'm starting to see the connection to fascism here.
Yeah.
Because, these movements often, they thrive on this kind of glorification of excess. They reject the values of reason and moderation.
Exactly, yeah. And Bataille suggests that fascist leaders, just like those potlatch chiefs, tap into this sovereign impulse, this desire to stand outside the rules, to embody a kind of transcendent power that defies the logic of the homogeneous.
So we've got the homogeneous, the heterogeneous, the sovereign. These are, I mean, all pretty abstract concepts. How does Bataille ground this in his analysis of actual, like, historical fascism?
So he does this in part by looking at historical examples. One of the most striking, I think, is his chapter on the army and military structure.
Okay, the army. How does the army fit into all of this?
Well, he sees the military as a kind of microcosm of these dynamics we've been describing. So the army, with its rigid hierarchy, its emphasis on discipline and sacrifice, it creates a kind of artificial, heterogeneous realm within the homogeneous order of society.
So it's like a space where the normal rules are suspended, where individuals are subjected to a different logic.
Exactly.
And a logic that is often based on violence, or at least the threat of it.
Exactly, and that's where the connection to fascism becomes really clear, right?
Yeah.
Bataille is arguing that fascism on this societal level seeks to create this kind of space as well, right?
Yeah.
Where the heterogeneous is harnessed and channeled toward this specific political end.
This is all incredibly thought-provoking, but I have to say it is pretty dense. How do we make these ideas more accessible to the listener who might be, encountering Bataille for the first time?
That's a great question. I think one way to do that is to constantly connect these abstract concepts back to concrete examples. So, when we're talking about the homogeneous, we could ask the listener to think about their daily routine, their job, the predictable aspects of their life. That's the homogeneous at work.
And then to kind of get at the heterogeneous, we could ask them to consider those moments that disrupt that routine.
Exactly.
Like a sudden illness, maybe, or a passionate encounter, or a dream that feels incredibly real.
Right.
These experiences, because they resist being categorized, they challenge our sense of order. They would represent the heterogeneous.
Exactly. Yeah. So by grounding these concepts in the listener's own experience, we can make them more tangible, more relatable, and ultimately more meaningful.
I like that approach. It's like showing the listener that Bataille isn't just talking about some abstract philosophical ideas. He's really talking about the very fabric of our lives.
Exactly.
The forces that shape our experiences and how we understand the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what makes his work so compelling. He's not just trying to explain fascism. He's trying to understand, the human condition itself.
Yeah.
What does it mean to be human?
It's a big question.
It is.
And it's a question that Bataille is grappling with in a very powerful and challenging way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So with that in mind, I think we're ready to dive into the text itself.
Let's do it.
And start to unpack Bataille's argument in Psychological Structure of Fascism.
Let's get started. So we've kind of laid out some of Bataille's core concepts, the homogeneous, the heterogeneous, the sovereign. Let's see how he uses these to really dissect the psychological structure of fascism.
Okay, let's dive into the text itself. The introduction to Psychological Structure of Fascism. It's short, but it is incredibly dense. I feel like Bataille packs an entire book's worth of ideas into just a few pages.
Yeah, he really does. And it's crucial that we unpack these ideas carefully because they really set the stage for everything that follows. Right from the start, he is challenging that prevailing Marxist orthodoxy of his time. He argues that, while Marxism provides a valuable critique of capitalist economic structures, it doesn't fully account for the complexities of the superstructure, the realm of religious and political formations.
So it seems like he's suggesting that there's something more at play here than just economic forces, right?
Yeah.
There are deeper psychological and sociological factors that contribute to the rise of movements like fascism.
Exactly. He's pushing beyond a purely materialist analysis of history.
Right.
He's interested in the role of the irrational, the emotional, the transgressive, all those elements that traditional Marxism tends to kind of downplay or dismiss altogether.
And this is where his concept of the heterogeneous comes in, right?
Yes.
It's that element that it disrupts the order and the rationality of the homogeneous world.
Precisely. And Bataille argues that fascism, while it appears to be upholding that homogeneous, through this emphasis on order, on unity and conformity, it actually relies on the heterogeneous for its power.
It's a kind of paradoxical relationship.
It is, yeah.
So how does this play out in practice?
Yeah.
How does fascism like actually harness the heterogeneous?
Well, one way is through this figure of the sovereign, which, he dedicates a whole chapter to. He argues that the sovereign, by embodying the heterogeneous, by standing outside the normal rules of society, exerts this powerful pull on the collective psyche.
And he uses that example of potlatch to illustrate this point, right?
Yes, yeah.
This archaic practice of ritualized excess and destruction.
Potlatch is like the perfect example of how the sovereign operates. It's not about rational, economic calculation. It's about this deliberate transgression of those calculations.
Right.
It's about asserting dominance through a glorious kind of waste, this defiant rejection of those values of utility and productivity.
Yeah. And Bataille sees parallels between this archaic practice and the dynamics of fascism.
He does.
He's suggesting that fascist leaders, like those potlatch chiefs, are tapping into this same sovereign impulse.
They are.
This desire to transcend the limits of that homogeneous world.
Exactly. Yeah. Fascist leaders, they often present themselves as figures that are above the law.
Right.
Who embody a kind of transcendent power that is beyond the reach of reason or critique. And they appeal to followers who are yearning for a similar kind of transcendence. They're seeking release from those constraints of the homogeneous world.
So you're saying that fascism offers a kind of perverse escape from the rational ordered world that we associate with modernity?
Yeah.
It's a way of tapping into something more primal, more visceral,
Yes.
even if it's ultimately destructive.
Precisely. And this brings us to another really crucial chapter in Bataille's analysis, the chapter on the army and military structure.
Okay, let's talk about the army. How does this seemingly rigid hierarchical institution, how does it fit into Bataille's framework of the homogeneous and the heterogeneous?
So Bataille argues that the army, despite its, outward appearance of order and discipline, actually creates a kind of artificial heterogeneous realm within the homogeneous order of society. It takes individuals out of that everyday world and subjects them to a different logic, a logic that's often based on violence, or at least the threat of violence.
It's like a zone of exception where the normal rules are suspended, where individuals are forced to confront the limits of their own individuality, their own mortality even.
Exactly. And this is precisely the kind of space that fascism seeks to create on a societal level.
Right.
It wants to establish a new order, a new set of values that are based on a different kind of logic, a logic that often justifies violence and transgression.
So if the homogeneous represents that world of reason and order, the army, and by extension fascism, represents a kind of eruption of the heterogeneous into that world, like a deliberate shattering of those norms and values.
Exactly. And this is where Bataille's analysis becomes really unsettling, because he suggests that this eruption of the heterogeneous, this embrace of violence and transgression, can be deeply seductive, intoxicating even. It offers a kind of release from the constraints of the homogeneous world, a taste of something that feels more real, more vital,
Right.
even if it's ultimately destructive.
This is where his concept of the accursed share comes in, right?
Yeah.
The idea that every society has this surplus of energy that can't be fully utilized for productive purposes and must be expended in some way.
Precisely. And Bataille suggests that fascism provides a particularly dangerous outlet for this accursed share, a way of channeling it towards violence, scapegoating, and ultimately war.
So for Bataille, fascism isn't just a political ideology. It's this kind of psychosocial phenomenon.
Yeah.
A way of dealing with that fundamental excess that is inherent in human societies.
Exactly. And he's arguing that this excess, this accursed share, can't be ignored or repressed. It has to be dealt with in some way. The question is how.
Okay, so we've talked about the homogeneous, the heterogeneous, the sovereign, the accursed share. How does all of this come together in Bataille's actual definition of fascism? He dedicates a chapter to this titled Fascism as Unification and Violence.
And this is the chapter where he really brings all of these threads together, arguing that fascism represents this particular kind of unification, one that's based on violence and the negation of individual differences.
So it's not just about bringing people together. It's about molding them into this single homogeneous mass,
Right.
erasing those elements that disrupt that desired unity.
Precisely. He argues that fascism seeks to create a society in which the individual is completely subsumed within the collective, where any trace of the heterogeneous is ruthlessly suppressed.
And violence is the primary tool for for achieving this, right?
It is.
It's how fascism enforces that conformity and silences dissent.
Exactly. He even goes so far as to say that the violence of fascism is in a sense gratuitous. It's not just a means to an end. It's an end in itself.
That's a chilling thought.
It is.
It's like the violence itself is part of what makes fascism appealing to its followers. It's a way of experiencing this kind of collective ecstasy.
Yeah.
This release from the constraints of individual morality and responsibility.
And this connects back to the idea of the accursed share, right? That excess energy that has to be expended. Bataille suggests that fascism provides this kind of outlet for that energy, you know, a way of channeling it towards destructive, but ultimately unifying ends.
It's like a dark ritual, in which the individual is sacrificed on the altar of the collective.
Right.
And the violence itself becomes this kind of perverse sacrament.
Exactly. And this is where Bataille's analysis goes beyond, a purely political or economic understanding of fascism.
Yeah.
He's delving into the realm of the psychological, the anthropological, even the metaphysical. He's trying to understand those deep-seated human desires and anxieties that make fascism possible.
So we've laid out Bataille's core argument in psychological structure of fascism. Now, you mentioned that the listener has also provided us with a number of Bataille's other works. How can we use these texts to kind of deepen our understanding of his analysis of fascism?
That's where things get really interesting. These other texts, especially those from the Visions of Excess collection, provide us with additional lenses through which to view Bataille's thinking. They help us see those connections between his seemingly disparate concepts, and to appreciate that full scope of his critique of Western civilization.
Okay, let's start with the accursed share, which we've already touched on. How does this book, which focuses on economics and anthropology, how does it illuminate Bataille's analysis of fascism?
The accursed share develops Bataille's theory of, general economy, which challenges that classical economic assumption that scarcity is the fundamental condition of human existence. Bataille argues that, on the contrary, there's this excess of energy in the universe, and that this excess, it has to be expended in some way.
And he sees this principle at work not just in economics, but in all aspects of human culture, from religion and art to warfare and sexuality.
Exactly. And that's where the connection to fascism becomes clear, I think. Bataille argues that fascist movements, they tap into this accursed share, channeling it towards destructive ends.
So those mass rallies, the militaristic displays, the obsession with violence and sacrifice, these are all ways of expending this surplus energy, but in a way that both unifies and destroys.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this helps to explain why fascism isn't just about economic or political power,
Right.
It's about something more primal.
Right.
This kind of deep-seated need for transgression and expenditure.
Okay, so the accursed share gives us a broader context for understanding Bataille's theory of fascism. What about eroticism, death and sensuality? How does this seemingly unrelated topic connect to his analysis of political movements?
This is where Bataille's thinking gets really interesting, I think, and perhaps a bit controversial. He sees this profound link between eroticism, death, and the violation of taboos.
He's saying that desire to transgress boundaries, to experience the forbidden, is deeply ingrained in human nature.
It is, yeah.
And he sees this desire as playing a role in the appeal of fascism.
Exactly. Fascist movements often exploit this desire for transgression.
Yeah.
They offer this, release from the constraints of the homogeneous world, a chance to embrace a kind of ecstatic energy.
Even a violent energy.
Probably violent, yeah.
So those appeals to a mythical past, the glorification of war and sacrifice, the demonization of outsiders, these are all ways of tapping into this primal desire for the forbidden.
Precisely. And this connects back to the figure of the sovereign, right?
Right.
The fascist leader, he often presents himself as the one who can break the rules, the one who can lead the people back to a state of primordial power and glory.
It's a seductive and dangerous combination.
It is.
And it helps to explain why fascism often has this this quasi-religious dimension, this appeal to a kind of transcendent power that lies beyond the realm of reason and morality.
Exactly. And that brings us to another relevant text, Theory of Religion.
Okay. How does Bataille's understanding of religion inform his analysis of fascism?
Well, Bataille argues that, the sacred represents this realm that's fundamentally separate from the profane world, the world of everyday life.
Yeah.
It's a realm of both terror and fascination, and it's accessed through ritual, sacrifice, and transgression.
So just like the heterogeneous disrupts the order of the homogeneous, the sacred disrupts the order of the profane.
Exactly. And Bataille sees fascism as attempting to create this new kind of sacred order, a new mythology that transcends the profane world and offers this sense of meaning and purpose that is often lacking in modern secular societies.
And this new sacred order is often based on violence, exclusion, the demonization of the other.
It is, yeah.
It's a way of creating a sense of unity and belonging, but through the exclusion and destruction of those who are deemed different or dangerous.
Precisely. And this connects back to Bataille's own personal quest for a kind of ecstatic union with something that transcends the limitations of the self, which he explores in his later work, Inner Experience.
Okay, let's talk about Inner Experience. This is a very different kind of book from psychological structure of fascism.
It is.
It's much more personal.
It is.
Even mystical in a way. How does it relate to Bataille's analysis of political movements?
Well, Inner Experience is a record of Bataille's own struggles with the limits of knowledge, with the desire for transcendence and the experience of anguish and ecstasy. And while it's not explicitly about fascism, it provides insights into the psychological motivations of those who are drawn to such movements.
So you're saying that Bataille, through his own personal struggles, gained a kind of understanding of that human yearning for something beyond the everyday, something that transcends those limits of reason and individuality.
Exactly. And he recognized that this yearning could be easily twisted and manipulated, especially in times of social and economic upheaval. He saw how fascism could offer this kind of perverse answer to this yearning. A shortcut to the sacred, but one that's paved with violence and exclusion.
It's like he's warning us about the dangers of seeking transcendence through the wrong channels.
Yeah.
Of mistaking the allure of power and violence for the true path to liberation.
Precisely. And this is what makes his analysis of fascism, I think, so relevant today.
Yeah.
It helps us to understand how these authoritarian movements can tap into our deepest desires and anxieties, and how they can, use violence and transgression to create this kind of perverse sense of belonging.
This has been an incredibly rich and thought-provoking discussion. We've covered a lot of ground, from Bataille's core concepts to his specific analysis of fascism, and we've even touched on some of his other works to deepen our understanding of his thinking.
And we've only scratched the surface here.
Oh, yeah.
Bataille's work is so complex and multifaceted.
Absolutely.
There's always more to discover.
But I think we've laid a solid foundation for the listener.
Yeah.
To continue their own exploration of Bataille's ideas.
Yes. And hopefully we've given them some tools for understanding.
Right.
Not just the historical phenomenon of fascism, but those underlying forces that are still shaping our world today.
So we spent a lot of time with Bataille's psychological structure of fascism, and we've even used some of his other works to shed light on his thinking. But I guess the big question is, what does all of this mean for us today? Why should we even care about these ideas almost a century after Bataille wrote them?
That's the question, isn't it? And I think the answer is that Bataille's analysis of fascism is, in many ways, more relevant now than ever.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Why do you say that?
Well, look around, right? Think about the world we're living in right now. The rise of populism, the resurgence of nationalism, this increasing polarization of societies around the world. These trends, they echo a lot of the dynamics that Bataille identified back in the 1930s.
It's like we're seeing a replay of the conditions that gave rise to fascism in the first place, but like in a new form.
Exactly. Yeah, like a technologically amplified form, you know?
Okay.
And that's why Bataille's work is so valuable. He's not just describing this historical phenomenon, he's giving us a framework for understanding how these movements gain traction, how they exploit our deepest desires and anxiety.
He's giving us a language to talk about these forces that are shaping our world, forces that often operate beneath the surface.
Right.
You know, like we're not even aware of them.
Precisely. And by understanding these forces, we can begin to develop strategies for resisting them, for building a more just and equitable world.
Okay, so let's talk about resistance. If fascism, as Bataille suggests, is this particular response to that excess energy, to the heterogeneous elements within society, what other ways might there be to channel these forces?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And it's one that Bataille doesn't, he doesn't give us any easy answers to.
Right.
But he does give us some clues. He talks about the importance of non-productive expenditure, activities like art, festivals, laughter, even the pursuit of knowledge itself as ways of channeling that accursed share. Yeah. In a way that doesn't lead to violence or destruction.
So it's like we need to find ways to embrace the heterogeneous, to acknowledge its power and its importance, but without letting it be harnessed for these oppressive ends.
Exactly. And this requires, I think, a really fundamental shift in our thinking, this recognition that excess is not something to be feared or repressed. It's something to be celebrated and creatively channeled.
It's like we need to reclaim the sacred.
Yeah.
From those who would use it for their own nefarious purposes. We need to find ways to experience that transcendence and collective ecstasy that don't rely on violence, on exclusion, or the negation of individual difference.
Precisely. And this raises another important question, one that Bataille himself hints at but doesn't fully explore. Could there be a non-fascist form of sovereignty?
Oh, I like where you're going with this,
Yeah.
because we tend to think of sovereignty as being so bound up with power, with control, with the suppression of difference. But what if there's another way of understanding sovereignty, one that is rooted in a radical embrace of the heterogeneous?
That's the challenge, I think, that Bataille leaves us with. Can we imagine a form of sovereignty that doesn't rely on violence, that celebrates difference, that embraces the impossible rather than trying to contain it?
It's a tall order, but I think it's the only way forward. If we want to avoid repeating those mistakes of the past, if we want to build a truly just and equitable world, we need to find ways to channel that accursed share towards creative, life-affirming ends.
And I think Bataille, despite his often dark and challenging vision, ultimately offers us this glimmer of hope. He shows us that those forces that drive fascism can also be harnessed for something better, something more humane, something more in tune with that fundamental excess of the universe.
So for you listening, we hope this deep dive into Bataille's psychological structure of fascism has been, as thought-provoking for you as that has been for us. His work is challenging, but it's also incredibly rewarding. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and about our world. Yeah. But it also offers us this path towards a more just and liberated future.
It's a future that requires us to embrace the impossible, to dance with chaos, to find joy in the midst of uncertainty. And it's a future that, despite the darkness that surrounds us, is still worth fighting for.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.